Welcome to this special Musical Passions podcast in support of CityMusic Cleveland and this live concert, which will take place on April 23rd at St. Stanislaus Church in Slavic Village. I'm your host, Eric Kisch, and my co-host is Jim Mehrling, my recording engineer for my Musical Passions radio program on WCLV. We're thrilled to be able to bring you interviews with three of the musicians who will be participating. The concert consists of two piano quartets by women composers born in the middle of the 19th century who lived well into the 20th century. Our musicians interviewed in this podcast are Sato, violinist, Minju Kim, violist, and Trevor Kazarian, cello. But before we get started, first, an important message from our sponsors.
This is Musical Passions, a program dedicated to the presentation of standout performances of the world's finest music. And this year, we're doing a special series of programs sponsored by CityMusic Cleveland. It's previewing a concert season in which many women composers will be in the spotlight. In this, the centennial year of women suffrage in the United States. And on this program, we are definitely featuring a couple of outstanding women composers, prominent ones for those who know them, and we will be doing our part to make them more prominent in today's program. Back to your host, Eric Kisch.
Okay, well, welcome. We have two works to cover. Both of them are piano quintets. And unfortunately, Liz DeMio, who will be the pianist for the group, is unable to join us, but we have full complement of strings for this. My first question is, and I think it's to you, Mari, how did this program get chosen?
Well, thank you for inviting us to today's podcast. We're very, very pleased to be presenting this program for CityMusic Cleveland. And the original idea for the program was actually dreamed up by Minju. It was going to be a romantic evening featuring music by Brahms, Schumann, and Mahler. And in readjusting to fit the theme, celebrating the women's suffrage movement, we decided that it would be fitting to choose composers from that same time period and who possibly knew these other composers. And in the case of Beau, that is certainly the case. So it's very exciting to find music that's quite complementary to the original vision. So thank you to Minju for that.
Okay, Minju, do you want to say something to amplify Mari's words on this?
I guess just one kind of a quick comment, which is that I was really happy that you found these pieces to sort of get at the essence of the original program, because I think they really reflect the original emotional experience I was hoping to create with the Brahms and the Schumann. So yeah, it's a really good program, exciting program.
And we have composers that are really right out of the Romantic period. And, it's very tuneful, melodic music that I think everyone will enjoy.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Well, the spirit matches, but also there's a wonderful tie-in with Beau, having studied with Clara Schumann. We think we had learned that she had taken 12 lessons with Clara Schumann, and she had also met Brahms. So, I mean, this is an interesting musical circle.
Trevor, we haven't heard a word from you as yet. Any thoughts on what it's like to participate in a concert which consists entirely of works by women composers that you probably were not particularly familiar with, as most music lovers and musicians are not familiar with these 19th century women composers? Any thoughts on that?
Well, they're both very enjoyable pieces to play. And, when I first went through the pieces, I guess you could say I didn't really know the full background on both composers. And over the last few days reading so much about them, I've learned a lot about what they've been through and how they came to compose these works. And so you just appreciate the music even more. And so I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Well, starting with Luise Beau, what so impressed you about their biographies as you were studying the background to the two works?
Just that they went through a lot of struggles to get their music out there, to prove themselves as women, to prove to the society that a woman can write music just as well as a man. So, and I probably, even though they were breaking through and making their own successes, it wasn't until much later that people became to appreciate it even more. I think even when they were having these little wins and successes for themselves, a lot of society still didn't look down upon women as composers. So, but and when you look back at it now, you see just how powerful these two women were, and you know, they're really heroes for anybody today when you look at all the things that they had to go through.
Thank you. Certainly very true that while they had some successes in life, shortly after their deaths, it seems that for several decades their music fell kind of by the wayside. But thank goodness in the last few years, interest in their work has picked up, and there are several performances of their music to be found on the internet, and an increasing number of their works are being featured, especially on YouTube.
I found an interesting chart online actually demonstrating this renaissance in interest for these composers. You know, the years 1877 and 1913, Luise Beau's music, sheet music was very much in demand, and then there was a big drop-off through the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then around 2003 was the height of the renaissance in interest, which I found very interesting. A graphic representation of what happened with a lot of these women composers who sort of dropped into obscurity.
What I'd like to do after we've sort of discussed Beau and the music is to play you a live performance of the first movement of the quartet, which I found incredibly beautiful and warm. What was your reaction to it as players? I'll open that up.
I mean, it's an incredibly lush and romantic and passionate piece. I had such a good time like studying it and learning my part, and I can't wait to play it. There are definitely some elements of like some influences, I guess you could say, without explicitly saying that was her intention, that you can hear like Clara Schumann maybe, or you know, maybe some Mendelssohn. That's just my opinion, but just the way like the first movement opens with this slow, I don't know, sort of like longing melody. It's just so beautiful and so, I don't know, nostalgic, very like quintessential romantic music. And I think, yeah, it just like really kind of speaks to her voice, I think. And you can hear a little bit that she's exploring, like you'll hear in the third movement, which is the scherzo, is very playful and kind of witty. And I definitely, again, like just my opinion, but like you hear a little bit of Schumann there, and the last movement to it just so passionate. So yeah.
Well, I can't play.
It's really fun learning it.
Our listeners will have to wait for the concert to hear most of that, but we have a little bit of it, don't we?
Yeah, we don't have time to play the whole work, and anyway, we don't want to give away everything. So this would be a taste. While I have you on screen, is there anything special about the viola part? Usually, you know, they're fairly subdued, giving an inner voice, but every now and then a composer actually lets rip and gives the viola a fabulous solo or very dominant section in the piece. Is there anything like that for you, or you can?
There's definitely, yeah, there's definitely some moments, I think, where the viola has its moments. But what I found learning this piece was that it's very intricate, and there's a lot of sort of like passing around of the materials. All the voices are, constantly sort of interacting or exchanging or interlocking. So yeah, I mean, it's active for sure. I think the viola part. So.
It's interesting. So much of the music that has been played in these city music chamber concerts have really been chamber and collegial. In fact, the last podcast that we did, which featured a clarinet quintet, talking with Dan Gilbert, who's the clarinetist, was saying that the Coleridge Taylor piece was using the clarinet as a fifth instrument rather than as a kind of solo with the quartet as the orchestra. And what you're saying with Beau is that there's very much this sense of collegiality as you pass the interesting bits around and share them and kind of enjoy them.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you feel that way too, Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, there's a sense of just being as one, one voice, even though there's four of us. And yeah, there's a lot of parts that the viola and cello will play together, and some parts in unison with violin. But my favorite part is the opening of the first movement, and then the slow movement. Just the strings when we play all together. It's really pretty, and the listeners will hear that in the first movement as well.
Great. Well, that's a perfect segue into playing you the first movement.
Music of Luise Adolpha Beau. That was her piano quartet in F minor, Opus 28. And the performers were members of the Canadian National Arts Centre Orchestra. Yosuke Kawasaki, violin, Paul Casey, viola, Rachel Mercer, cello, and Frederick Lacroix, piano. And back to you, Eric.
Thanks, Jim. I hope everybody really liked that and uses it as uses it as an appetizer for the concert to come. I should mention that the concert featuring these two works will take place at St. Stanislaus Church in Slavic Village on April 23rd, Saturday at 7 p.m. This day also being Shakespeare's birthday, so much to celebrate. And we're looking forward to having as many of you as possible to sign up for actually attending the concert, which will be a one-off. It is not being recorded, so if you want to hear this music, you're going to have to register to be able to attend, and it's a limited number of people who will be allowed in because of restrictions due to the pandemic. But we should be very thankful for St. Stanislaus for actually allowing live concerts. So that's the good news. We continue with more good news, actually, and we now move to the second work on the program, which is also a piano quartet by a composer, frankly, I have never heard of until now, Elfrida, who is Swedish. And
I think if you're not Swedish, that's why you don't know her. I think she was probably, enough of a personality in Sweden that people would know. There she is as a young woman, an old photograph, obviously, probably from around 1870-ish, which is why it's a little fuzzy. She's better known from the later pictures, of course. There she is also as a young woman. But she was from Gothenburg in Sweden, and she ended up being the first organ graduate from the Royal Swedish Academy. And she eventually became the first woman composer to conduct her own symphonies. But fairly early on, she became the organist for a number of years at the cathedral in Gothenburg, Sweden. And so she was quite well known in Sweden, a real pioneer, a composer, conductor, and prominent organist.
Now that we've got a little bit of background of her, who discovered her music? Was it you, Minju, or Mari?
It was Mari, yeah.
I just happened upon her music as I was having my own private listening party and, women composers evening, binging on a wide variety. And I started listening to a recording and I couldn't stop. And I found it very fascinating. And as you can tell, it's a very romantic work. In rehearsal, we've described it as very singing and dramatic. The last movement, Liz aptly described as sounding like a Schubert song. And that really spoke to me, and it has influenced how I feel about performing it. So,
well, that's very inspiring to think of this unknown work as making you think of a Schubert song. I cannot think of higher praise. Minju, what was your reaction to it?
Yeah, it was the same for me. It was really interesting, first of all, to discover this piece, um, and to just sort of see what, at this time, I think it was sort of towards maybe the latter half or end of the Romanticism era, maybe by the time she was writing this piece. I believe it was like, what, 1870 or something like that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting for sure to see somebody who's absorbed a lot of works around her, and also being pretty like geographically more remote than the sort of the center of classical music, writing and culture at the time, which was more sort of like Germany and
But
other
Sweden has
countries
quite a
in that area.
tradition of
Yeah, but it's
composers.
curious that she was so well known in her country at the time, and wasn't so much outside of it. But just to hear that, so much of what we listen to in other composers, like, that she was writing it in her country. It was really interesting to sort of learn that, and to learn that about her, yeah, through this work. So really fun.
But I have a feeling that she could actually be quite a discovery today. In doing
Mm.
the some background research for the podcast, I ran across a comment from the English Guardian newspaper, which has some excellent musical articles and reviews. And the critic who'd never heard of her before, having to review this recording, was quite blown away by it and its quality, and saying, wow, I think we've got an important new discovery coming in. Trevor, what's it like to do the cello part for this particular work?
That's a lot of fun. It's very pretty. It reminds me of a little bit of Schubert, sometimes how the way the lines move a little bit and the way the cello part is played. It's just really enjoyable to play. But I was reading up a lot on Elfrida, so if I have some interesting things if you want to
Go for
know.
broke. Go for broke.
She also had a sister too that also played organ, and she also sang. And Elfrida's father, he was what was it? He was a district physician, but they came from a very liberal background. And beside Elfrida learning organ at the time, she was also trying to, trying to become a woman that could work in the telegraph industry. And at the time, this was right at the time when women were able to work as telegraph assistants. So not only was she playing organ, but she was also working as a telegraph assistant. And she had to qualify to earn that organ position in Gutenberg. And then not only when she qualified, she had to get permission from the government to apply for and hold that position. And when she won that position, she had gone up against 6 other men. And so she was extremely excited when she found out that she had won the position. And when she was playing organ, she would play on Sundays only at the church. And not only was she had to play, but she had to take care of the organ. So she felt like her back was, about to break from all these years that she put in having to, I guess, tune the organ and, just take care of it. And later in her life, she had developed walking with a limp, and she had a hunched back even, just because she had just put her entire life into playing organ. And another interesting thing was when her symphony was performed, the debut of it, she felt like the men in the orchestra, particularly in the violins, they were purposely playing bad, her work. And she was with her sister as they're watching this. They left before the final movement because she was just so discouraged at the musicians and how they performed the piece. And there was a review, and it was a really horrible review that they gave her, but through all this, she still, she fought for her music, and she strive to just keep putting her music out there and being the best that she possibly can be. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I could keep going about, but I won't.
That's really exciting
Yeah,
to discover.
yeah.
Do you
Life was
think
quite a
it would be
trial.
possible today for a bunch of musicians to gang up on a woman composer
No,
and play badly?
not with social media, not with Twitter. You'll get destroyed.
Okay, on the basis of Trevor's really interesting unearthing of so much of her background and the importance of the organ to her, are there any traces in the quartet that you think might come from a composer whose kind of mental hearing process is very organ-like?
I don't know. That's hard for me. When I play Bach, I can definitely hear the organ, but it's harder for me to hear it with her music. I'm sure if I maybe studied the score a little more, I could probably find parts where I could see the organ was a big influence, but I'll look into it more, but not at a first playthrough. Yeah.
Mari, Minju, any thoughts on that?
Well, we should have Liz speak about this, but I feel like I can tell for both works that the composers played a keyboard instrument. Wouldn't be able to tell if it was organ or not for Elfrida, Andrée's piece, but Beau, for sure I could tell is a pianist. I think one of the barriers for having the Swedish composers' work performed more is perhaps having a more edited version that would have a string player's touch to it. Working through bowings has been an interesting challenge for us. There is an edition right now, but I think that, you know, in consultation with string players, it would be really exciting to see like a second edition. From what I understand, the Swedish composer, she was quite prolific, but much of her music was not published during her lifetime. And I think a lot of this work is being done posthumously. And so, and it's worth it. It's worth the time. I just think that it will take some time having professional musicians try these works, perform them. That's the true, you know, road test to see if some of these bowings and articulations really can work. But there's wonderful phrase markings written, but it's just a lot of the details that still need to be worked out. And that's how I can tell that these were both composed by keyboard players.
Okay, fascinating. I wish Liz were here to comment on that. Minju, any thoughts on that?
No, I think what Mari said was exactly right. And I guess the only thing I can really think of is, at least in my part, especially like parts of the second and the third movement, you could possibly imagine some sort of pianistic keyboard like idioms, like in the sort of this like flourishing, decorative 16th notes that get kind of, it's like a lot of filler notes. So you can imagine, you know, like her playing this on the piano or on the keyboard. And
well,
so
I know at the concert, I'm going to keep that thought in mind. And actually, we can kind of get a preview of that as we listen to the first movement of this piano quartet. So let's do that and then see if we have some final thoughts about both these pieces.
There she is, the Swedish composer Elfrida Andrée. We heard her piano quartet in A minor, just the first movement. The rest you'll have to hear at the concert. The performance you just heard was Berit Charles, violin, Klaus Christa, viola, Björg Vernes, Luise, the cellist, and Akiko Shiochi at the piano, performing that first movement.
Any final thoughts? I want to thank you very much for your cooperation, willingness to take time out from very busy schedules. It took a while for us to be able to schedule this podcast interview. And I really look forward to the concert on the 23rd, as I'm sure will be all of us who are attending. And I think anybody hearing this podcast will kind of cock their head to see if they can pick up any of these keyboard reminiscences, so to speak, hidden in the string music. So Mari, Minju, and Trevor, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you at St. Stanislaus. That's at 7 p.m. on Saturday, the 23rd.
This has been Musical Passions, a podcast arising from the radio program long dedicated to presenting performances of the world's finest music by the finest artists of this and the past century. Thanks for joining us in this special series of programs presented by CityMusic Cleveland, highlighting works by women composers in its 2021 special concert season. A reminder that these CityMusic concerts are made possible by audience contributions by people like you. Keep that in mind as you attend the concerts. And in this challenging time of pandemic, keep informed about upcoming concerts. Sign up for their mailing list here at citymusiccleveland.org. This is Jim Mehrling speaking for Eric Kisch, thanking you for joining us for this special podcast.